to stop her, you have to lean back once to stop. And I have to tell you that this lean back was really challenging for a lot of older adults. And there was one lady who had a lot of fear of falling, and she said that once she actually was able to do this movement, it was like life changed for her. So we also allowed them to basically choose one of two speeds. So you can lean forward twice in a row, and then she would go into speed 2, and then you would lean back twice in a row to get her to speed 1. And then finally, we also had a whole lot of debate about whether, so our games partners really didn't want to allow her to turn around because it's not natural turning around like this. It doesn't look natural. But we said, yeah, but when you're walking around the city, you often want to change directions. You remembered that it's actually over there. So if we're trying to figure out if they actually know where the cafe is, I need to know that she can turn around. So we had that implemented. So if she's stopped, you can lean back again, and that turns her around. Okay, and then in terms of the intersections, once you get to an intersection, you have these arrows that appear, and then you lean to the left, to the right to turn. So to teach them basically how to use it, we implemented this tutorial. And it worked pretty well. Sometimes we had to do the tutorial twice, but we only had to do the tutorial basically in the first session, and then when they came back for their second session, they were fine. So I will just show you an example of, this is a pilot participant. So she's the mom of the PhD student who was working on this project, Neve Merriman. So she's going along, and you'll see her try to navigate past these obstacles, and it doesn't work. We actually got rid of those big red things because we said we don't know what those are. Can you get rid of them? So this is the first version of the game, and then we moved the map, I think, above and the target below. This was sort of, so we gave sort of the idea to the to Testaluna. We kind of found some snapshots of games on the internet that had similar things that we had envisioned, and then they just created a prototype. They sent it to us. We tried it ourselves. We got some older adult volunteers to try it out, and there was a lot of things that we had to work out. So I think they basically did 2 iterations of the game before basically our time was running out and we had to start doing the study. Okay, so in terms of actually conducting the study, we had to essentially deconstruct this CityQuest because from a research perspective, if we just took this game and we trained people and then we took a control group that didn't train, if we see improvements in various things, it could be because of the balance board component, it could be because of the spatial navigation component, it could be because of the obstacles, or something else. And typically, like neuroscientists, cognitive scientists tend not to do these complicated games like that. So what we were interested in is basically deconstructing the different components of CityQuest. And so what we created were 2 control games. And this is not really a full deconstruction because all of these 3 groups had a balance board. So they were interacting with the game through the balance board. And so in the spatial quest, the task was just locate 4 landmarks in the learning phase and then find the most efficient route to those landmarks. There was no obstacles to avoid and no pedestrians in the city, so it would really look like a ghost town. And so they were walking around in this ghost town all alone. And then in the obstacle avoidance game, their main task was to run around the city and basically collect gems at these intersections. So the city was exactly the same as in the other 2 studies, in 2 conditions. But their main task was to collect gems and basically also avoid the obstacles. And we also basically increased the difficulty of the obstacles in the same fashion. So by the end, and also the size of the city to match the average increase in the size of the city of the other groups. And they basically had to pay attention to fainter and fainter obstacles along the way. Do you have any questions about the game itself so far? Okay. So now I can tell you a little bit about the actual intervention study that we conducted. So we recruited, we screened about more than 100 older adults from the Dublin community, from North Dublin and South Dublin. And 73% completed baseline visit, 3 didn't return. So overall we started with 36 fallers and 34 non-fallers. So a faller would be somebody who had at least one fall in the last year or multiple falls in the last 3 years. And these would be non-accidental falls. So if somebody was riding a bicycle and somebody ran over them, they're not a faller. So these people would generally be like walking around and they tripped and they don't know why. And sometimes it happens, twice a year or something like that. And then a non-faller means you didn't have any falls that are non-accidental or unexplained in the last 5 years. So then they did a bunch of pre-tests. We tested them on, I think, 2 sessions. And then they came back to the lab for twice a week for 5 weeks. So they had 10 sessions that they have to come in. And we had set up basically two balance boards and 2 screens in this big room. And they would sometimes be wearing headphones. Yeah, we had to, because there's some sound in the game as well. Sorry, I forgot to say we also included basically all the obstacles that were moving around. They also had naturalistic sounds that went with them because we wanted to have a multisensory component in the game. Okay, and so then basically we allocated these 70 participants into these 3 different games. And we ended up with, after people dropped out at the end, we ended up with about 21, 20, and 15 participants completed. So these are not huge sample sizes, especially if you divide it into those who fall prone and those who are not. So this is just sort of the constraints of the time that we had. That's what we ended up with. So overall, they were around 72 plus or minus 5 years old. Mostly women, but also a few men. About 64% of the fallers reported having a fear of falling. And about 30% of non-fallers also had a fear of falling. It could be a function of our advertising, because we did mention sort of falls and fear of falling in the advertising. And the MoCA is basically a screening for cognitive impairments. So these scores show you that they were not showing signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. This is a whole bunch of tests that we did on them before and after. I will show you most of them, so I won't go through the list. Okay, so actually this part here, we wanted to basically evaluate, did they like the game, and also would they consider this game as an acceptable intervention for alleviating their fear of falling or reducing their risk of falls. So first of all, I'll walk you through. Sorry, I forgot to say, I forgot to include a slide here, is that if you look at basically, did they improve in the game? The majority of people improved in the game in terms of their spatial. They went to bigger and bigger cities, but there was quite a range in people who improved steadily and people who basically plateaued at some point. So that's just to give you context. So these are some, I'll show you some data on, I looked around in the literature and what came up is the game experience questionnaire. So we used this questionnaire, and I've since heard from some people who might be in this room that this questionnaire, I've only later realized that it wasn't It's not even officially published yet. So anyways, but it's used a lot. So we use the game experience questionnaire to basically evaluate how much they like the game. So here I'm showing you basically the items. So the questionnaire consists of like 33 items that they all load into these different component factors. So the core part evaluates basically how much how they're feeling while they're playing the game. So in terms of feeling content, happy, and so on, across the three groups, so this is CityQuest, Spatial Quest, and Obstacles. So across the three types of groups, they didn't really like one group didn't like the game more than the other. And the white squares are followers and the triangles are non-followers from here on later. So this really says, okay, they had fun. They were sort of moderately in the flow, moderately kind of immersed in the game. In terms of feeling skillful or competent or good at it, there was quite a range. Some people really thought that they were really bad, and some people thought that they were the best. So in the CityQuest game, they really fairly, a lot of them kind of felt that it was difficult. And then challenged, they were all sort of moderately challenged, and I think that this might be a reflection of our adjusting the difficulty of the game. So this is actually pretty good because we wanted them to be challenged throughout. And happily, there was not a lot of problems with negative affects, so nobody really felt bad. Irritable, annoyed, frustrated, also pretty low, except for some people. Yeah, so this annoyance, I know exactly what was happening here, and this is I guess a bug in the game, you could say, is when the person would actually find the target after like roaming around the large city for 5 minutes. They find the cafe and they stop in front of it, and then the big garbage truck would still slowly like ran into them. But they can't move, like it's basically waiting to go to the next level. And at that point, no matter how much they move, they're not gonna move. And they were like, this is really, really frustrating. So that was that, to be improved. Okay, so they had fun. So I described all this. Post questionnaire looks at how you feel after playing the game. Are you revived, feel like a victory, energized, so on. That wasn't really so strong. They were like moderately, meh, okay. But happily, there was not a lot of negative experience at all. So they didn't hate us after playing the game, which happens after doing psychophysics experiments, for example, if they come into the lab. Return to reality was not an issue except for, I don't know, one person. And some people did feel tired after playing the game for about 30 minutes. Okay. Okay, so then we also asked them, would they play it if, do they consider this game as something that really is targeted to them? So the attitude to false-related intervention scale basically assesses, so if you devise like a really good and effective false-related intervention, but none of the older adults actually feel like doing it, it's really not useful. So this scale is really evaluating, is your target population interested in taking up this intervention? So for the objective outcome, the question is, do I feel like doing the intervention was good for me? And a lot of people thought that it was, and especially the older adults who are fall prone. Subjective outcome was made me feel confident. Then other people whose opinions mattered to me thought it was good for me to do it. That was also, we got sort of high scores on it, except for, obviously there's large variability. Behavioral control, that means that I felt that it was easy for me to do the intervention. That was also pretty good. I'm the type of person that should be doing this intervention. So some people were roped into the study because their wife was participating. So I think these are some of those people. This is the basically I would do this again in the future. So the obstacles game scored lower on that. So it seems like people were sort of more impressed by having to like navigate the city and things like that. An obstacles game, it felt more a little bit sort of childish, I would think. And so overall total score, so a score of 28 is generally considered, anything above 28 is considered good. So this is an intervention that would actually work. So we were very happy to see this. We also asked them things like, how likely are you to purchase a Wii balance board after playing this game? They were not very likely, except for some. How likely are you to recommend this intervention to a friend? Again, you can see obstacles game was not so popular, a little bit less, I guess. The other two were more so. And you can see sort of the spread in the, this was, if you had a balance board game, a Wii balance board at home, and you had this game, how regularly would you play it? And so you have some people who are saying I would do it every day, or like very often, and some people say never. So obviously we're getting a spread of answers, not surprising. So did they think that it benefited them? So this was really sort of subjective. How much do you think engaging in this training improved these aspects? And so you can see, like, I mean, I could have shown you the means, but the means don't really say much. But you see sort of the spread of answers. But overall, you know, we have sort of moderate to high people saying that it improved, it reduced my fear of falling. And people were saying that to us sort of in person as well. It improved my vigilance, concentration. I mean, they thought they got all better. So maybe they were just saying that to be nice to us. And I realized that that's like a really possible thing. So we used a sort of a validated balance confidence scale. So the activity-related balance confidence scale. And they filled out that questionnaire before the study and at the end of the study. And there was no differences across the three types of games, and that's not surprising because they were all using the balance board. But we did see an improvement in the balance confidence of older adults who had a history of falls from pre to post, and no difference in the non-fallers, who overall scored pretty high on that scale. Other scales, though, like falls efficacy, or also the mini best basically evaluates their balance control in a bunch of different tests, objective tests. That didn't show any differences from pre to post. In terms of perception, so I used the UFOF task. So this is sort of the original UFOF task before it became commercialized. So the UFOF task consists of basically there's two conditions where in one condition, you're asked to stare right in the center of a screen in front of you, and you monitor these locations for a brief flash. And then the brief flash happens, and then you have to report which spoke contained the flash. And I vary the duration of the flash and basically can figure out your accuracy for a particular duration. And then another task is you have to monitor the center and the periphery for the flash, and at the center you're going to see a letter. And then you have to oops, did you see the letter? Yeah. So then you have to report the letter and the flash. And so you can measure basically people's ability to extract these two types of information. And what people have shown before is that older adults, that's kind of the ball and cooler task I showed you before. It's an extension of that. Basically, your ability in this task correlates with things like driving, bumping into people when you're walking, and so on, and it's really affected in aging. And so here I'm showing you the proportion correct in the focused condition, and you can see in blue that's pre across the three groups, and post everybody improved. In the divided attention condition, everybody also improved. And when you look at the divided attention cost, basically how much worse you get in the divided when you have to do the letter and the flash compared to just the flash, you see that there was an improvement, basically a reduction in the cost in the groups that had the obstacles, so CityQuest and obstacles, but there was no significant change in the group that didn't have any obstacles in the game. And the improvement was similar for fallers and non-fallers. So this kind of suggests that, yeah, having to pay attention to all these faint obstacles in the way helped them out. Another task that I used was motion coherence thresholds. So in these types of tasks, you have one interval where you see a bunch of a cloud of moving dots, and a portion of these dots are moving either to the left or to the right. And in another interval, they're all moving in random directions. And you have to say which interval contained the coherent motion and also which direction the motion went. And I can vary basically the proportion of the dots and figure out what's the minimum amount of dots that you need to be able to detect that motion. So this is evaluating the sensitivity of your motion system. And in terms of horizontal motion, we didn't see any change from pre to post in their ability to extract horizontal sensitivity. But we did see an improvement in their sensitivity to radial motion. And I think it could be because of all the optic flow that was happening during the game. Now, finally, the last task I'll tell you about was, so Neve Merriman was the PhD student who was working on this project, and she was interested in spatial cognition and spatial navigation, and she had a couple of tasks that she evaluated their ability to basically find their way around cities. So in this task, she actually had, it was a really cool, so the graphics group, Carol O'Sullivan, created what's called Metropolis, which is basically a virtual representation of Trinity College campus. And they painted the campus beautifully, so you could basically navigate the campus virtually, and it was really wonderful. So they created a route through this campus, and there was 8 intersections, and they would turn left or right or go straight at these intersections, and at each intersection you would see an object that would pop up, and you were told to remember the object and where it was. And after you view the route twice, you were asked a bunch of different things. One of those things was you would see an object that you saw, like this car, and another car that was a different color, so that was a distractor, and you had to say which object you saw on the route. And so there was some improvement in the groups that had objects, that had obstacles in the group. So this group, the obstacles group and the CityQuest group, actually improved in their ability to recognize the objects that they saw on the route, not the spatial group. And there was an improvement on a different task as well, where they had to basically, she would show them an object, and they had to put a cross on the map of the campus of where that object was. So that's locating the object on the map. And that ability, that performance in this task improved in the CityQuest group and somewhat in the SpatialQuest group as well, but not in the obstacles group. There was a couple of other tasks that she tested that didn't show any improvements. So not everything got better. I realize I'm almost out of time. So we also, a subset of participants were scanned in the fMRI, in the MRI scanner. And Georgia Callahan afterwards analyzed those data for, are there changes in the gray matter or anything like that that happened in older adults. And so you can read this paper in the Multisensory Research Journal to know more about that, because I don't have time to go into that. So what I want to say is basically the take-home messages from the study is that this custom Wii-based video game was fun, also acceptable as a falls-related intervention for older adults. We did see that just after 10 sessions, we had improvements in aspects of perceptual function, cognitive, spatial cognition, and also balanced confidence. I think there's a lot of next steps that can continue from here. There are some aspects of the game that could be improved, but also the study should really be replicated in a larger sample. And I think it would be really interesting to examine basically prospectively, does playing this game reduce the risk of falling for this particular person or this particular group of people compared to a group that is doing something else, for example. And I think that there might be a potential for larger benefit because all of these people basically walked in from where they live to our lab, and they were very high-functioning older adults. And I think that there's a lot more potential for improvement in the case of older adults who live in long-term care, or maybe who are just much less mobile, or older as well in their 80s and so on. So with that, I would like to thank the whole team of the Verve project. So I really didn't touch on all the other use cases and everything that was happening in this amazing sort of project that was spearheaded by Dr. Carol O'Sullivan from Trinity College Dublin. So Ivan Orvieto and Matteo Romagnoli are from Testaluna, who used to be at Testaluna. Now they're both at different places. They were really the ones who created the game for us, and we were really happy with how we worked together. And Dr. Fiona Newell was my supervisor on this whole fear of falling project, and Neve Merriman was the PhD student who got all these older adults into the lab and kept them coming back. And there was a lot of also undergraduate students who helped run the study because it was quite time intensive. So that's all I have today. Any questions? Yes.
So it's a cool concept for a game that involves both motor and cognition. In terms of the difficulty level, it seems like the main thing you looked at was changing the cognitive demand. Is there any way to change the physical demand and balance? I was thinking like an asymmetry threshold or something like that you need to get more asymmetrical to change corners?
Yes. So we had to set some kind of sensitivity, I think, to the board, right? And I think that was fixed. So I have to say that there was some difficulty involved in balance. It wasn't completely dissociated because the more dense the obstacles were, the more you had to do smaller movements or plan ahead to avoid them. But I see what you mean. Like we didn't play with that. But I think that there would be possibilities there. And I think so one thing that really came out of this is that it was really, we kind of did it by hand, but I think to deploy it into the real world, you would have to actually implement it in an algorithmic way inside the game, that it adjusts to the difficulty of each person, because we had quite a range of abilities in older adults in actually being able to control the balance board. We had one participant who actually never really learned how to, move it around. And you really don't think that it would be difficult, but you just have to see. Yeah, but they really improved. And that one lady said that just like it took her 3 sessions to be able to do this. But after she and they had the Zimmer frame, so she was holding onto it, and then, and she said that really just freed her up, and she was able to, at first she had her husband coming with her to the sessions because she was afraid to go out in the streets on her own. And by the end of the study, she was coming into the lab on her own. So, yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering how much you told your participants about why your lab is doing it, so what that neuroscience component is. Because I wonder if it would help older adults to know that falling increases as you age because of the reasons that you cited at the beginning.
I think it might help. So how much did they know about the lab? I'm trying to remember. So we had 3 waves of recruitment. And I think between the first and the second wave, we actually had a reception where we invited people who were interested in the study, and we told them about it. And in that reception, I actually had a demo, an intro about how does vision change with aging and how it might be related and things like that. And here we have this cool study that you can take part in later on. So, but I think, yeah, they don't really know that much besides what they see in the paper, and they say, it says like, come to, but it was fun for them to come to Trinity College, like it was a big attractor. It was funny because a lot of them just had never, Trinity College is downtown Dublin, and they had never actually been in the side campus. So that, yeah. I think that there's a lot we can do in terms of outreach to inform people, older adults, basically, of what are all the different factors that could contribute to your fall. But at the same time, we don't want to increase their fear. But I think knowing that, yeah, having a fear of falling actually could make you at a higher risk of falling, and that yes, you shouldn't overestimate basically your ability. You should calibrate your activities to what your abilities are. But I think some people prefer to be cautious and think that that's better. But research shows that it actually leads to more falls.
One comment something that is a little bit curious. This is a very neuroscientist approach in which you actually are deconstructing the same game, kind of like different games, and testing everyone has individual conditions.
Yes.
Only from the physical rehabilitation or from therapy, you will see a different approach once you probably combine, once you probably test this against conventional therapy. Meanwhile, from the ACI, you will see people probably testing different games, not only different versions of the same game.
Yes.
So this is something a little bit curious this point of view. I wondered about if you asked from game literacy from the oldest, so they have any type of experience playing extra games before?
No,
That
most
was
of
kind
them.
the first time.
Most of them not. I think there was one person that had the Wii at home, and they were like, at the reception, they were basically saying how much it helped. And that person actually was one that had a stroke before, and he was kind of using it to rehabilitate. He was, yeah, but no one else really had much experience with the Wii, yeah.
I also wonder if you have made some iterations in terms of game design with the older albums, because for that you show here, it seems like probably the game design guys have like input from the older adults in terms of the mapping.
We had the iteration, so they made like a first version of the game, and then we had a couple of older adults come in and try it out. And we ended up changing some aspects of the control of the Wii board based on that, and also some aspects of the visual components. There was, I think, one feedback, but it wasn't like a explicit study. Like, we didn't record data on that, but it was more sort of a piloting.
Will it be more natural to have the marching or the stepping replaced,
So
or the navigation instead of the...
It's curious you say that. So the other use case that I didn't have time to like include in here was also a TCD with Richard Riley. Richard Riley and